Your first trip to a different country can be an intimidating experience. Did you forget to pack something important? Do you have the right documents needed to enter the country? And how can you avoid dangerous situations? Here are 13 tips for traveling abroad for the first time that you need to know so you don't end up lost, sick, or alone on your first trip abroad. I'm on a local island in the Maldives right now, so let's do this at the beach to see what it's like before it rains. The first is to set up Uber the right way. Most major cities in the world use Uber, even if they don't necessarily encourage it. And while it's certainly not the most adventurous way to travel around from place to place, it is the safest and most convenient, especially if you set up these 2 Uber safety features ahead of time. Number 1, Uber has a setting that requires the driver to enter a PIN before he can start the ride, and this makes sure that you're in the right car. And number 2, you can use the application to share your location with someone that you trust. And ideally this would be a friend or something in the same city as where you're at. But if you don't have any, you can also let your family and friends track your location back home. Which brings me to tip number 2, and that is to always let people know where you're going. This one might seem like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised how easy it is to forget this when you're excited about all the activities you're doing. Let's be honest, you can be the most cautious traveler in the world, but sometimes accidents just happen. And I don't want to be too dark here, but imagine you got in a car accident or something and got knocked unconscious, and if you don't tell someone where you are, no one's gonna know that you're in the hospital. Always share your itinerary, flight details, and contact information for where you're staying. Make sure that you update your contact every day so that they know you're safe, and this can be as easy as just shooting them a quick text message. I'm pretty horrible at staying in touch with people, so on my first solo trip, I just set up location sharing in the Google Maps app, and that let my family always know where I was. You can also do this natively on iPhones in the Find My settings. Speaking of text messages, you don't want to be left stranded without an internet connection when you're traveling abroad. If you're on a super tight budget, you can hunt down a physical SIM card and get a local data plan once you arrive in your destination. But a much more convenient option that I use is to set up a travel eSIM before you leave on your trip. It takes like 2 minutes and you don't have to deal with long lines or language barriers or scams when you arrive. An eSIM is basically a digital SIM that doesn't require those little plastic cards in your phone. If your phone is compatible, you just add an eSIM by scanning a QR code or using an app on your phone. This saves you the hassle of relying on sketchy Wi-Fi or dealing with expensive roaming charges while you're traveling. Because when you first land in your destination, you need to get to your hotel or accommodation. And believe it or not, there's some airports that still don't have free Wi-Fi, and it can be really stressful if you don't have internet to try to get an Uber to where you're going, or to guide your taxi driver, or to navigate public transport. Olaf, the sponsor of this video, is my go-to travel eSIM recommendation for heavy data users. They offer unlimited data plans in over 50 different destinations, so you never have to worry about running out of data during your trip. That means you can share your adventures on the go and stay in contact with loved ones so they're not constantly worried about you. So far, I've tested out Olaf's service in the US, Portugal, Spain, Greece, Morocco, and Egypt. And you can see how it performed for me, including way out in the Sahara Desert, in my full Olaf review that I'll link to below. Apart from the ability to set up your eSIM before your trip, it's also nice to have 24-hour customer service in 5 different languages. This is handy because, let me tell you, if you buy a local SIM card in a different language and it stops working for some reason, you're gonna have a heck of a time trying to fix it. For an extra 5% discount on your eSIM, you can use the link down in the description with the discount code PROJECTUNTETHERED. Next is to download a map offline of where you're staying onto your phone, because no matter what you choose for your SIM or data option, there's gonna be times when you don't have service. That's why it's always a good idea to download an offline map using Google Maps or Apple Maps or another app called maps.me. I have a step-by-step video guide on how to do this, and I'll link to that one below as well. Offline maps saved us big time once when we were out hiking in the desert. We lost the path there was nobody around. We were running out of water and it was starting to get dark out. I was about ready to panic when I suddenly remembered that I had downloaded a map offline and we used it to find the trail again. Next is to try to at least learn the language basics of wherever you're traveling. Locals will be 100 times happier to help you if you make a small effort to at least learn a little bit of their language. At least this is what I've experienced on my own travels. If you're just going on a short trip, the goal isn't to become fluent here, so you don't need to feel overwhelmed or anything, but just try to learn 5 or 10 survival phrases that you could probably memorize during your flight. Knowing the basics helps you avoid getting ripped off or getting lost in public transportation or peeing your pants because you can't find the bathroom. Even if you're traveling to a touristy destination where English is widely spoken, you can put a smile on locals' faces by saying, "Hi, how you doing?" in the local language. There are plenty of apps where you can learn the basics, and Duolingo is probably the most popular. I also find it helpful to quickly create some digital flashcards in my phone and just flip through them whenever I'm sitting waiting in a restaurant or something. I use a free app called Cram, but I'm sure there are plenty of others. Now, if you have absolutely zero desire to learn the language, don't let that stop you from traveling. You can still survive and have a fun trip. But come on, at least learn hello, goodbye, and thank you. Next, while you're studying the language, don't forget to look up the current exchange rate. That way, whenever someone tells you a price, you can do some quick mental math to determine if it's a good deal or not. For example, we were just traveling to Brazil where $1 equals around 5 reais. So when we were price shopping for some tours around some awesome national parks, we instantly know that 50 reais is $10 and 500 reais is $100. The sooner you get the feel for the exchange rate, the less likely you are to get overcharged. Like this video if you found it helpful so far so that YouTube shows it to more first-time travelers like you. Next, if you're worried about your first time traveling abroad, start with a beginner-friendly country. What do I mean by that? Well, for one, travel will most certainly be easier if you're in a country that speaks your language. So if you speak English, you can visit England, Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, some countries in the Caribbean, and also the Philippines. The other thing you can look for is if there is a large expat community. Generally speaking, the larger the expat community, the more facilities that the place will have to help you. There's also a community there that you can lean on if you're not sure what to do or if you just want to make some new friends. Next is to leave your expensive stuff at home. In Colombia, they have a saying, no dar papaya, which literally translates to don't give papaya. But what it actually means is to not show off your expensive stuff. And while this is a Colombian saying, it's a good habit to get into no matter where you're traveling in the world. The last thing that you want is to bring unwanted attention to yourself. And so showing off expensive jewelry or watches or phones is just asking for trouble. By leaving your expensive stuff at home, you won't have to be stressed and worried about your things when you should be enjoying your trip. I have an entire video on clever ways to outsmart thieves while traveling that you can watch next in the description. Another major rookie mistake is overpacking. Trust me, you're not going to need it. Whatever you packed in your bag, take out 50% of it. Just bring the essentials so you can leave room for all the cool stuff that you want to buy while you're on your trip. Another idea is to pack an extra empty packable backpack inside of your main luggage that you can use to store souvenirs for on the way back. Also remember that unless you're traveling to the middle of the jungle or something, you can probably find and buy anything that you need while you're on your trip. So don't stress too much about forgetting things or worrying about not packing enough clothes. But let's talk about one important thing that you should pack when traveling. Now, I'm not going to get into an entire packing list here. You can subscribe if you want to see those videos. But one thing that you definitely should bring is a travel adapter. Many countries around the world have different plugs for their outlets, and you don't want to get off a long flight to realize that you can't charge your phone. The adapter that I use is super handy because it works in over 150 countries and it has 4 USB-A and 1 USB-C ports built into it, so you don't have to carry around a bunch of those small charging bricks. Next is to be prepared for immigration. If you don't have the right documents with you, you risk not being allowed into the country. For example, one time they almost didn't let my wife into Spain because she wasn't carrying $800 worth of cash on her, even though she had a bunch of different credit cards. Now, in this case, I'm pretty sure that the immigration lady was just trying to give Diane a hard time, but it is important to know if you need to bring a printout or something of your bank statements. Every country's entry requirements are different, and not only that, but it'll also depend on what country you're traveling from and what passport you have. To make matters worse, if you try to look up this information online, you may find conflicting information. There are tons of different visa agencies and immigration sites online that make it confusing to know which is the official site. For example, when searching for information on Thailand, you may run across the site thaiembassy.com. You may assume that this is the official embassy site because of the name, but in reality, it's just a law firm site that may or may not be up to date. To make matters worse, sometimes the actual official government websites look horrible, like they were designed 20 years ago. My advice is just to keep digging and only to trust info from the official government websites. When you buy your flights, a lot of times your airlines will also send you an email with the entry requirements, but not always. Next is to take photos of all your important documents. That means your passport, credit card, visas, reservations, travel insurance info, or anything else that might be important, like a copy of your prescription medicines or something like that. It's not a bad idea to have a photo on your phone as well as a printed out copy in case you don't have your phone or your phone is dead. If you lose any of these items, it might be hard to get them back while you're traveling if you don't have a proof of identity or proof that these things are yours. You may read in some destinations that you should carry your passport around you at all times, but I 100% disagree with this. Your passport is your lifeline, and you want to keep that locked up and as safe as possible at all times. Just use a photo on your phone, or better yet, a physical photocopy instead. Which brings me to my next point, which is to always get covered by travel insurance. You might not think you need travel insurance, but trust me, you really do. There have been so many times when I've landed in the hospital for one thing or another. Multiple motorcycle accidents in Thailand, tainted water in Patagonia and Easter Island, a lung infection in Colombia, an eye injury from accidentally squirting hand sanitizer in my eye during the pandemic. You really can't make this stuff up. Even if you think you're a pretty careful person, you never know when you're gonna have a crazy taxi driver or eat some bad food. I'll link to my go-to travel insurance below that costs less than $2 per day. Next is to don't blindly follow YouTubers' advice. This might seem like a silly one because you're watching this video, but I think you should always trust your own intuition. Influencers and YouTubers can give you advice based on what they have experienced, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing for you. Do your own research on the specific destination that you're going to, because it's going to have its own quirks, its own local scams to look out for. Everywhere is different. Speaking of scams, I'm putting together a video on common scams that all travelers should know about, so make sure to subscribe to get notified for that one. After backpacking through Egypt, we pretty much earned our PhD in avoiding scams. Next is to know what you're allowed to fly with. The things that you're allowed to pack in a checked bag are different from the things you're allowed to pack in a carry-on or personal item. For example, if you have a big bottle of sunscreen or shampoo, you'll need to pack that in a checked bag or divide it into smaller containers that are each less than 100 milliliters. Take some time to research all of these rules so you don't make any big packing mistakes. One time I accidentally left my Swiss Army knife, which was an heirloom and had a lot of sentimental value, in my personal item, and it got confiscated in the airport. Luckily, they saved it for me and I was able to pick it up from the airport later after my trip. There are a few other super important airport mistakes that you'll want to avoid on your first international flight.